Hello and welcome to A Closer Look. I'm your host, Linda Fontaine. Today my special guest is Danielle Goodrich. She is the Tri-Cities Area Director with Tennessee Stands. Thank you for joining us today, Danielle.
Thanks, Linda. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me on.
Our pleasure. First of all, what is Tennessee Stands? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Tennessee Stands, we are for constitutional rights. We're for God-given rights, which are supposed to be constitutionally protected, and we're also for small, limited government. And the reason why we started was because during COVID, what we saw was this trend to move away from away from God-given constitutionally protected rights. And we saw a lot of our leaders operating outside of the principles of the Constitution. So I'll give you some examples. So we had mayors and we had governors and we had even the president, who is part of the executive branch, who they were creating policy and they were ruling through executive order. Well, the executive branch isn't supposed to be creating policy. The executive branch is supposed to be executing the laws or the policy that the legislature makes, that the legislative branch makes. And so there was some operating outside of the separation of powers and outside of the Constitution. And we had in Tennessee even the judicial branch making policy, which the judicial branch isn't supposed to make policy either. They're merely supposed to rule on it. But we had a judge in Tennessee who, after mask mandates went away, and the school decided that they weren't going to continue them anymore, there was a couple parents who had special needs children, and they sued to reinstate the mask mandates, claiming that their children didn't feel safe at school. So what the judge did was he essentially removed the unalienable rights, which means non-transferable, of the many and transferred it to the few, and he remasked the children, even though there wasn't an existing policy. So a judge created policy. So we have a lot of unconstitutionality that has happened under the name of this virus, which we saw as something that we really need to stand up against. And we even have the federal government who is acting outside of the Constitution. So the Constitution, they give parameters to the federal government. They have to operate, they only have the authority to operate within Article 1, Section 8. That's everything that the federal government is given authority over. That's it. And so through COVID, we had them operating outside of this and using their authority for things that they're not supposed to. And what's supposed to happen in that instance is it's supposed to go back to the 9th and 10th Amendments. So if it's not outlined in Article 1, Section 8, the federal government isn't supposed to have jurisdiction over it. Therefore, it goes to the 9th Amendment and the 10th Amendment. It's supposed to be the decision made by the people and by the states. And so these things weren't happening. So Tennessee Stands was created, and we were a bunch of moms, we're a bunch of doctors who had seen their career politicized for the first time ever, and a bunch of pastors who were like, why is the government closing my church? We need to open our church, the people need us. It was a bunch of people who lost their businesses through this, and you had small businesses who were shuttered, and that was their livelihood. And that's how they feed their families. And now they're being told that they can't operate their business, yet we're funneling all these people to Walmart, and Walmart can be open. So there's a lot of people suffering, and a lot of these people joined Tennessee Stands under Gary Humble. He's a man out of Franklin, Tennessee, and he used to work for the Family Action Council. So he's used to protecting the rights of families, a Christian organization. And so he started this because he had a really good command over the Constitution, and he started making these videos and educating the public in the ways that the government was operating outside of their authority. And he saw that there was these little freedom groups popping up across the state. And so the one I created was Johnson City Freedom. And the reason I created it was because my kids weren't in school. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and I have a 4-year-old. And at the time, I had a kindergartner who only had contact with her teacher for 5 minutes a day via video, and then was watching videos for the rest of the day, trying to learn how to read through that. And so at this point, we realized this wasn't good for kids, and we wanted to get them back into school. And so we created Johnson City Freedom, but then it expanded from moms trying to get their kids back into school to these doctors and to these pastors and to these other people who were being wronged by the government operating outside of the Constitution. And Gary connected all of these freedom groups across the state, and he brought us together under Tennessee Stands. And so last I knew, and I think it's more than this now because I didn't check the numbers, which I should have, but there's about 15,000 of us across the state in Tennessee who are a part of Tennessee Stands. And there's about 2,000 here locally in the Tri-Cities who are trying to push to retain our God-given rights that are supposed to be constitutionally protected.
So this is very interesting. So it's been around just maybe a couple of years?
So yeah, we started right at the beginning of COVID.
Okay, that's what I picked up on.
So Gary Humble actually sued our governor for the unconstitutionality of the lockdowns and the mandates, and he argued that the government shouldn't have that type of authority. They shouldn't be able to close churches. They shouldn't be able to tell people that they can't provide for their families. And we were told it was going to be 2 weeks, and it just kept going on and on and on. And he said, we have to do something. And so he started it, and so it started with litigation, and then it just grew. He was educating people through videos, and then we started getting involved in legislation. So we realized, okay, well, this is a way that we can affect change in the state, is by entering some legislation that can make it so that this type of thing can't happen again.
That's really interesting. So your mission is to, sounds to me like, keep people accountable, keep our politicians accountable as to what's going on and what they can and cannot do, and to bring that to the public. Am I picking up on that correctly?
Yes, yeah. It really grew organically into a community. So it's, all these people who were suffering and under these mandates and lockdowns, and so it just grew into this organic community where people felt like something wasn't quite right. And if we look at what's happening in our country, we can really see that there's a clear divide, and it's really this ideological divide, and it's between people who want to preserve our constitutional republic and people who agree with the principles of a free and fair market, and then it's people who want collectivism. Well, what are modern day forms of collectivism? Socialism, communism, and fascism. And so what we're seeing is that our constitutional republic, we're being walked into this other ideology, and there's a lot of us who aren't okay with that. And there's 8 steps in which we can be walked into communism via socialism, and we're seeing all of them in our country right now, and so Tennessee Stands is trying to push back. The number one step, known thanks to history, is to take control of healthcare, control the people. And there's really no argument that that hasn't happened. We have lots of examples here locally. So even if we look at our local healthcare monopoly, what happened there? We had a free market system where there was 2 competing systems, and they had to answer to the concerns of the consumer. And because of that, it drove up quality and drove down prices. Well, when they proposed the merger, the FTC was against it because they said, we're not going to be able to the government's not going to be able to regulate the free and fair market like the consumer can, and it's going to lead to increased prices and decreased quality, and that's exactly what we've seen. But there's other ways too. We had doctors who were being told they can't treat early, which is what doctors have always historically done, because you don't want to wait until something turns into pneumonia. You want to treat it early. And then we have, the mandated medicine, which if we look at that, what is that really? There's certain principles of a free and fair market. There's liability. So how do we, the consumer, help regulate the free and fair market? If a product harms us and it harms enough of us, then we're going to sue, and that product's going to have to go back to the drawing table and come up with a better, safer product, or they're going out of business. Well, what's another way we have? How do we make purchasing decisions? We look at consumer experience, we look at consumer opinion, and we heed their opinions in our purchasing decisions. Nobody's calling that person a liar or anti. That's how we make purchasing decisions. But both of those ways that we, the consumer, hold an industry accountable were completely removed. And so it's really no argument that the healthcare industry has been taken over, but there's other steps too. So there's also take control of education. And that's something we push back on too, because we're seeing that there's this move away from these free market principles, even in the school system, and towards this collectivism, where kids, we have kids, they're saying, through critical race theory, they're saying, black child, don't learn math, it's racist, so don't learn it. And that's really not an empowering thing to say. That's not an American principle. Instead, they should be saying, if you work hard, you can achieve anything. That would be the better thing to teach, and that's more in line with American principles. So we can see how all of these 8 steps are happening in the country, and so we know that there's a push to really walk us away from a constitutional republic. So Tennessee Stands is trying to push back in the opposite direction, and we're trying to bring back these principles of a free market. And the way we're doing that is through community, but it's also through legislation. So if you go to our website,
what is that website?
So it's TennesseeStands.org, and if you look on there, there's a take action. And you can go through all of our bills. So we have lots of bills that have to do with election integrity. We have lots of bills that have to do with these issues that are happening in the schools, where, these people, school board, were elected to represent the parents, and they're not. And so we have some bills that have to do with that. And then we have some bills that have to do with medical freedom and ensuring that people can make those decisions for themselves. And so that's really where our focus is. It's, to push back against the principles which are walking us out of a constitutional republic.
All right. Well, give me that again. Tennessee Stands, and you spell out Tennessee, TennesseeStands.org. People can find out more information and how they can get involved with y'all, right?
Yes, so TennesseeStands.org, and you can subscribe to our email. That way you get all of our updates and all of our calls for action. And there's the take action, so you can go on there and take action with our legislation.
Very good. Danielle, so much to talk about. You'll have to come back on. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much.
This is A Closer Look.